doing well. So it's morning here, but I'm sure it's like different time zones in your time. So today I'm really excited to introduce one of my dear colleagues that I got to know through this GloCal Fellowship. So he's going to be sharing his journey, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end to, really reflect on his journey and ask questions. So I'll start by giving a brief introduction. Dr. Tony Raj. So Dr. Tony Raj is the Dean of St. John's Research Institute in Bangalore, India, where he also heads the Division of Medical Informatics. He's a professor of physiology at St. John's Medical College, where he has served as faculty for 29 years. So he has a wealth of knowledge. His early career research interests included metabolic physiology, essential amino acid requirements, body composition, and insulin sensitivity measurements. With 20 years experience in medical informatics, his current research interests include studying innovative digital health interventions to improve health outcomes in resource-constrained settings. He was appointed the Chief of Information Technology at St. John's for 5 years and was responsible to initiate the digital transformation at St. John's Medical College and Hospital. He was one of the lead architects for the National Health Portal developed by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India in 2010. And he's also an advisor and member of the Vision Group for Technology-Enabled Healthcare Setup by the Government of Karnataka, India. And as I mentioned before, he serves as the leadership group member, a steering committee member for the UCGHI GloCal Fellowship, where I got to get to work with Tony. And he's also the founding directors for St. John's Health Innovation Foundation, the innovation incubator at St. John's. So I actually got to meet him back in May in Hanoi Medical University when we were doing the Asia regional workshop. So it's a pleasure to welcome you here. And Tony, the floor is yours. I would say like 45 minutes, and then, have the rest of the time for questions and answers. So welcome.
Thank you, Jay. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to get back onto this panel and have a chat and share, my topic, which is work-life balance. In a short while, I'm going to project my screen, so just allow me to do that. Just give me a second. Yes. A sec. So you should see. I hope you can see my screen now.
We cannot yet.
Not yet. Okay, let me just minimize it.
Yeah.
I think that should be it now. I'm just going to put it in presentation mode.
We can see it now, Tony.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so this is what I'm going to chat with you today. And as young researchers and fellows of the GloCal Global Health Fellowship, I'm happy to even share some of my own stories as I walk along this presentation. And, we'll have a nice discussion at the end of it. I'm happy to take questions and share more insights. It's a difficult topic, as you all know, trying to balance professional and personal life in academia and in research, more specifically post-pandemic, has changed a lot of things. So in today's session, what I'm going to try and walk you through is, try and share some of the stuff that is already there, try and get some of your thoughts as well as we walk through. And these are the kind of topics we'll go through. I'll quickly start with an introduction and even move to, do we really need to balance? And I've looked at some surveys, very difficult to find specific data on work-life balance, but there was an interesting survey done in 2018, and I'll share some data from that across academics. And there's also publication from, you know, K awardees in the US, and I'll share some insights from there. And then we look at strategies of what do people do, how do they address this issue, and we conclude, and then we'll open it out for questions. So yeah, this is something that I myself have experienced. How do you balance your personal life and your work life? And it all boils down to an individual's prioritization between both these domains. And of course, as I said, it's difficult. It's really difficult to draw that line between personal and professional. But I think that's a matter of discussion as we come to the end of this session. For a long time, and there are several articles, if you actually look at the literature or just Google this term work-life balance, you'll be hit with quite a few of these, many of them, some of them in, like, say, the Harvard Business Review in 2014, or another version of it more recently. All of them have covered this topic. If you look at what the Harvard Business Review mentioned in 2014, say this is an elusive, ideal kind of term, which at the worst is a complete myth. And there are Indian magazines, for example, this one in 2020 spoke about, does work-life balance really exist? So people have spoken about it. Obviously, it's a topic that matters. And if you look at it, someone's even created a work-life balance for dummies book. Having said that, yes, there is literature as well. And if you go on to PubMed and do your searches, you'll find quite a few of these. Post-pandemic, there are a few more articles which have appeared. And I've shared a list, a reading list, which I'm sure will be circulated later, which lists out most of these publications. But more importantly, if you look at academia, it's very difficult to define this because the boundaries are not always clear and not easy to draw. For those of you who work in wet labs or on labs which do molecular work, you realize that you start an experiment and it'll probably go on late into the night. You can't walk away, right? Likewise, for people who are doing field studies, you're on the field for pretty much 8 to 12 hours at times. So very difficult to draw this line of saying, okay, I can pack up and walk away and go home. So that's always been a challenge, as one researcher put it, or a faculty, saying it should be defined as work-rest of life, because work is a big part of my life and I love what I do. Someone else said, sometimes passion can blur the line between professional and personal life. And if you're really passionate about your work, those lines disappear and you're kind of working and you bring that work home most of the time. Post-pandemic, many companies, I'm not sure about academia, at least not much in our geography. Many companies still have work from home. However, for clinicians and others who are in contact with patients, or others who need to be in labs, we're back to more complex scenarios. As I said, the lines have blurred even further. most people created offices at home. The technology improved so rapidly in all geographies that now everyone's working from home. You have a work in office, a home office, for example. So this has worked well for some and not worked well for others. And I'm sure we're still trying to cope with this change. Some even question, is it work-life balance or is it work-life imbalance? Or is it work-life conflict? And that's something to ponder about as we go along. So the big question is, do we need a balance? And, does it really matter? Take, for example, certain occupations, like, say, the airline industry. They have very stringent rules about, the rest you need, because the kind of responsibilities pilots have are quite huge. They're expected to ensure after let's say, a 10-hour shift, they need to rest for 8 to 10 hours. They need to sleep for at least 8 hours. You could be de-rostered if you've not got adequate sleep. Well, unfortunately, in academia, we don't have such thing. Of course, flexi time is coming in. And most of us end up with this walking on the tightrope, managing research, managing your projects, managing your writing, managing your teaching, and of course, family. And then it's very difficult to draw those lines. So let's take a look at that survey I mentioned about, and that'll give us some idea of what do people think across academia, right? Of course, more recently, many individuals in academia are seeking a balance between their personal and professional lives. The new gen is also, adapting very rapidly, because other domains, like people who work in other jobs in finance and other sectors, definitely are, managing to balance. However, in research and academia, we're still kind of having a conflict. So there are an increased number of women taking up careers in science, research, and academia across the world. There's an increased sense of family responsibility and parenting among both women and men. Increasing expectation that men involve themselves in housework and parenting. In some of our geographies, it was still predominantly women, and that's changing very rapidly. Technology penetration has definitely caused work to enter homes, and that we all know. So this is the survey I was talking about. This was a survey done way back in 2017, 2018, and was published by the Times Higher Education Global Survey, where they surveyed over 2,379 staff who worked in academia, and these included both academics as well as professional and support staff who worked in academic institutions. So this study cut across the UK. 61% were surveyed from the UK, 17% from the US, about 5% from Australia. Overall, there were 56 countries from 6 continents that participated in this study, and the results revealed what the academicians were thinking, what were professionals and other support staff who worked in academia thought. And I haven't really found an updated study or another survey of this nature. And I thought I'll share this with you because it puts out some of these thoughts, or the data speaks for itself. For example, this is a question about how many hours per weekday do you typically work? And the blue bars are academics, and the red bars are professionals or support staff who are working in admin or supporting the academic institution. And for example, you'll notice that typically majority of them were working for about 9, 10, or more than 10 hours. The other question was, how many hours do you typically work on the weekend? And, and you remember, this is a survey done several years ago. I'm sure things have changed dramatically, but unfortunately, you couldn't find a similar, study or survey. But if you look at this itself, it tells you that people are working on weekends. Of course, the academicians are working more on weekends as compared to the professional support staff. And if you looked at to what extent do you feel that your work has a negative effect on your mental health? Well, a large proportion, significantly, male academics as well as female academics felt that their work had a reasonable amount or a lot to do with which affects their mental health. So obviously there were negative impacts of working excess hours or extra hours on their mental health as well. There were questions even more personal in this survey about the effect of having children on working hours and your career development. And here you'll see it more granular. The blue bars are male academics, the red bars are female academics. The green is male professionals and the yellow is female professionals. So if you look at the question on the left, if you have children, to what extent do you feel they hold back your career? And many of them said a little, but yes, you had more women saying that their careers were definitely affected. Question 7 and graph 7, for example, this was a little complex because the question is, if you had children, and this was addressed to people who already had children, how many more hours per week would you expect to work if you did not have children? It's a bit twisted, but yes, what they meant was how many more hours would you work if you did not have children? So they were losing about 10 hours or more. That's what they felt. So if they did not have children, they would be working much more. Share of childcare. Now, these are personal questions. What happens to people in academia or professionals working in academic institutions about childcare? If you have children, how much of the children do you do? How much of the work do you do for childcare as compared with your partner? And you'll notice that women definitely were doing a lot more work than men in these surveys, especially the female academics. And on who supported you in looking after your children when you were not at home, it was obviously family. A large proportion were family members. There was, of course, some who didn't have support at all. And so this is data from the survey, which just is putting out figures and facts here to just put this in perspective, whether, obviously it is affecting people and they're speaking their mind out. When asked, how does work-life balance in academics compare with friends? Most of them said a lot less, definitely less, which meant people in other domains are definitely having a better life. They were able to manage family and work. So academics definitely felt that things were not going too well with them. So continuing with this, maintaining relationship with friends, and this is from the survey, For example, a senior lecturer mentioned this. A senior lecturer at a university in Northwest England only managed to see most of his friends once a year because of the realities of working and family life, combined with the fact that he lives far away from them. On this question about how does work-life imbalance affect relationships, that was, another issue which came up. 46% of academics say that their job gets in the way of their ability to conduct a successful relationship a lot, while a further 26% says that it does so to a reasonable amount. So going on, what would you expect to improve if you have changed careers? 33% of academics said they expect to improve work-life balance. Because some of them said they expected a higher salary, but many of them said they wanted less stress. So it's obvious this survey at the end of it summarized that, yeah, increasing work hours, workload, working on weekends, that's exactly what academicians were experiencing. It worsened their mental health, having children affected their careers, increased work hours. Share of childcare was predominantly still burden on women and women academicians. And work-life balance in academics was worse off than people and compared to other domains. Academic work affected maintaining friendships, and work-life imbalances affected maintaining successful relationships. So I'm sure that data, that survey kind of put this in perspective. And we all know that from our own experiences. If you've been working and if those lines are blurred, I'm sure you've gone through these wondering, why am I feeling so overwhelmed? When does my day end and when am I going to catch up with, this ever growing ticker list of things to do? This study published in 2014 on, about what happens, the physiological stuff that happens when people have a burnout. There's increased blood pressure, heart rate, cortisol levels, depression, physical ill health, anxiety, all part of this whole burnout that most people experience when these lines get blurred and they're just working too much. On another study, and this is something that I wanted to share with you before we move on to strategies to deal with work-life imbalances. This was a study done between 2010 and 11. And here about 100 former US recipients of the NIH K08 or K23 awards were interviewed, and about 28 mentors. 59% of them were women and 41% men, right? 63% of the female K award recipients indicated that work-life balance was a significant personal concern as compared to 33% males. And some of these themes that emerged from this study that they published was, for example, there's this awardee who said, the thing that I prize most, and I know I share this with other women in academic medicine, is really being able to have both family and a successful career. It's crazy busy with the two, but without the two, it just wouldn't be as satisfying and fulfilling. On societal expectations, gender roles, and spousal dynamics, many respondents felt that work-life balance issues were especially challenging for women, in part due to societal gender roles. For example, a male K body mentioned, I think the social conditioning, it's a social thing that we expect women to be more into the child-raising thing than men to be less. While another awardee said this on the role of mentoring and achieving balance. And this is an important aspect as well. Some female respondents commented that they had modeled themselves after being mentored by role models who were women clinician researchers. I quote, I think I've learned from my mentors, in particular two female mentors. I've learned a lot in terms of working to be as productive as you can be with your academic career, but realizing that you still have to fit in the rest of your life as well, especially being a woman. On institutional policies and practices, for example, flexibility of academic work, while some described having express support from their institution for utilizing flexible scheduling, others relied on flexibility on an ad hoc basis from their respective supervisors or mentors. You know, and I quote another female K-body who said, allowing me to work from home, I didn't have to do it under the table like I've heard of some other people do. We actually had it all written out, what days I would be there or here, and what days would I be there. So these are, since it's a qualitative study, I'm just putting out what people thought and said. On stereotypes and stigma, although participants were high achieving individuals with K awards, a number of female respondents felt that women were more likely to be perceived as prioritizing family over work, while this was not accurate. And I quote, there is just sort of an attitude about what women's priorities really are and what happens to women when they have babies. There is some willingness to accommodate, but there is also just a lot of pressure to show it's not interfering with my work. So yeah, so these two studies, the survey and this interview, a qualitative study done on K bodies, is interesting because it puts out the challenges and the stresses and what people have been going through in academia, especially when you're into research as well. So how does one address this issue? And again, this is not an easy, fix. As I said, there's no simple solution. There's no one size fits all. And it usually depends on each individual trying to find the best solution that works for them. As I mentioned, it can be challenging, and you have to find a solution that's tailored because of each one's work. It's very dynamic, and each one of you have your professional role cut out, and of course, you have to work towards making sure that you have adequate time for personal work and personal time as well. While research suggests that successful faculty researchers are those who have a sense of control over their work and schedules, as I mentioned earlier, it's easier said than done. And sometimes it's a lot more challenging to kind of ensure that you keep both sides balanced. Right. Here are some tips from various sources. And as I said, there's no one fix for any of these. I'm sure some of you have already tried out some strategies. I'm sure some of you have discussed with your mentors and supervisors and how to kind of cope with, situations. So some of these are based on time-tested methods, self-reflection, just reflecting, setting boundaries, work smarter, not longer, right? Managing technology, and I'll go into each of these as I, move through my slides. Prioritize self-care, and there are distractions, which is outside work. Create a support network. While these are kind of 6 tips, while I was recently looking at more tips, there's a blog which I have that I've shared at the last slide, or one of the last slides. There are about 9 hacks for academicians suggested, and we can go through them as well. And I'll leave you to read that blog later today or whenever you have time. Talking about self-reflection, and this is kind of essential if you really want to understand or figure out a sense of balance. It's good to reflect on your goals, short-term, long-term, professional and personal, and chat with your mentor as well at this point. Some institutions and universities have what's called an individual development plan, where the mentor and mentee work together to develop this, so that once you have a plan, you're kind of working towards this, and it's not chaotic, and you then also work towards putting in a time management kind of schedule to help you achieve your goals that you set out to. In many instances, this doesn't get done, especially in our geographies. The concept of an IDP doesn't exist. Still, we try to get universities or higher education institutions to kind of understand that every individual, especially young, early career researchers, faculty, doctoral students, etc., need to work towards an IDP. And that will help you attain some balance. There are various tools to kind of map out areas in your life, and I'm not going to get into that, but I'm sure you can Google and find these tools. The other is setting boundaries. And this is where it gets tough, because once boundaries are not clear or not set, you will overlap. And when these lines get blurred, that's where you start having the sense of being overwhelmed. You have the sense of just running on a treadmill, and the treadmill doesn't stop. So setting boundaries or protected time for activities do help focus both professional and personal activities. For example, you can set a time to write manuscripts, reports, data analysis. And some people even choose times where they're sharpest, because our attention spans and our mindset changes through the day. So there are tips on about which time of the day you do a certain type of activity, or rather. So block off time. Set out time for family activities, for leisure activities, right? And also learning to say no for activities that are not relevant. Sometimes you just get drawn into activities just because you're there to support someone, or you're just there in the radar. So there's a way to politely say no as well, and figure out, focusing on your, activities that you're set out to do, they're blocked out. Working smarter, not longer. Effective time management will help you do this. And this usually comes with experience. Using a single calendar, at least in my own experience, I've moved on to calendar, and everything is on that calendar. So at any point of time, at least I know what's coming up that week, that month, that 6 months, or even up to a year. And it's important to do that, because that will set in a certain hygiene of your time, certain discipline comes in. But also leave room for flexibility, because if you overschedule your calendar, you will again feel like you're on a treadmill. And ensure you keep windows in your calendar so that there is flexibility of time, right? And I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the Eisenhower decision matrix, but that's one of the tricks that people use to prioritize their activities, because sometimes how do you prioritize an activity? And well, we'll come to that in a short while. But so yeah, on the left is an example of a calendar. I typically use the work calendar, which is one of the more famous applications. And I just block off time, as you can see, in various colors. So I kind of know what's an academic activity. You'll see the blue stuff blocked off for academic work. So no one can schedule anything into that, while I have meetings and, in different colors, and more academic work, the oranges, teachings, schedules, etc. So use technology to work smarter and not longer. And this is the decision metrics, which was proposed perhaps by the former President Eisenhower, categorizing things with either urgent or not urgent and important and not important. And these four quadrants would finally help you prioritize your work. So if it's urgent and important, you do it and you do it now. If it's not urgent and important, you schedule it to do it later, decide to do it, but don't do it immediately. If it's urgent and not important, you could delegate and decide who can help you with this task. If it's not urgent and not important, delete it. And this is typically all the reels and everything that keep coming on our social media, right? Which can be heavy distractions in our work. So that's, with working smarter, not longer, and helping prioritize your tasks. Managing technology, and this has been a big challenge for me as well. Email, whenever it came in, became a huge distraction. In fact, it transformed our lives from paper to, communicating electronically. But it also became a huge distraction, especially at this point when I handle an administrative role. The number of emails I receive is like 200 per day. And again, deciding which do I prioritize. I have to have a quadrant like this to decide what do I answer now, what do I park. But there are times when I just turn off email alerts and say I'm focused on my writing work or focused on other work that needs my brain time. Messaging apps again. All your instant messaging apps have invaded our lives to such an extent that we are constantly distracted. So that's another tip, to turn off these or have a scheduled time to just respond. Otherwise, every 30 seconds, you're going to be looking at your phone or your device to respond. And as I said, turn off all alerts from all unimportant apps on your phone, because that's another big distraction. And apply discretion on taking calls at work or at home. So yeah, while this is happening, all of you are also familiar with, so it's sometimes good to be unplugged. That's especially when you're doing focused work. But also with this new Gen AI coming in, there are a lot of smart tools that you could use to improve your, working smarter rather than longer. And I'm sure there are other programs that can go into the depths of that. But since it's not a part of this, I just want to lay it out here that yes, a lot of people I know are using Gen AI tools to help them improve their efficiency for that work. And it's also creeping into research administration work as well. Prioritize self-care, right? Ensure adequate sleep, exercise, and nourishment. I mean, these are things we know we have to do, but we just take our bodies for granted. Have at least one thing that you would do which is not work related. Find some recreational activity. And address physical and mental issues promptly, because sometimes I've noticed academicians postpone their problems and keep carrying it on till it enlarges into a huge problem that has to be then managed very differently. And time away from office can give you a fresh perspective. Take a break, take a holiday, if you have, and schedule that so that you're away from this whole treadmill that you're on. Organize your space at work and home. And one thing that I've begun practicing more recently is mindfulness. Just turn off take a walk, you know, enjoy nature, just keep your mind off all the other things that are running and saying, what's my next task? And it works. More importantly, we need to create a support network. And this network typically could be your work colleagues, could be your mentor, could be your spouse, your partner, etc. Right. So that's a brief of what I had to say about, addressing it. And these are the other 9 hacks which I found more recently. It kind of reflects what I just ran through: creating boundaries, working smart, taking time off when needed, abandon perfectionism. There's a paper on this, and I'll probably share the link with you. So someone published a paper that if you're trying to be too perfect, you end up with a burnout. Right. We're all pretty imperfect. I know research demands a certain rigor, but there's an interesting publication about many people who practice perfectionism end up with burnouts, and we need to reflect on that as well. Spend more time with loved ones. Get out into nature. Sometimes it's just good to clear your mind after work, schedule breaks, and talk to your supervisors for tips on work-life balance. I'm sure they'll be happy to share their stories with you as well and give you some tips on how to, feel at ease. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to share with you today. In conclusion, yeah, balancing both personal and professional is important. It's important for researchers, faculty, and physician researchers, because if you need a fresh perspective, if you're into innovations, and if you feel this, if you're overwhelmed and if you're feeling cloudy, your perspective will be very different as compared to if you're fresh and, if you're all out there, the motivation improves, right? Mentorship interventions, improved institutional policies, and addressing cultural aspects as well. Uh, and of course, encouraging a professional culture should improve this balance. Unfortunately, women continue to bear the burden of this imbalance in many geographies in the world, and steps to reduce gender stereotyping and stigma about flexibility of work are required. Well, successful researchers are those who have a sense of control over their work and life, personal schedules, and getting into time management is an important point here. Self-reflection, goal setting, and time management, as I mentioned, will finally help a good balance. And as I said, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. An individualized, tailored approach is what is required to help balance our personal and professional life. So thank you so much, and thank you for your patience in listening. I'm happy to open out the Q&A and happy to take any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tony. This was, I feel like this is such an important topic, especially, for many of us who are starting the academic career. So really, really appreciated your thoughts on this. Yeah, so we are doing okay in time. So I want to open it up to fellows to ask questions. You can put it in the chat or you can unmute and ask away. Any questions for Dr. Raj? Make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, so I have so while fellows think about questions, I have a couple of thoughts and comments. So Tony, I think, the work-life balance, this is like a lifelong endeavor, right? And so I have 2 questions. So you mentioned like the strategy about like alignment with your mentors. So, aligning with a woman mentor who can kind of understand like your perspective as a woman, for example. What happens when And then, for GloCal Fellowship, we have a lot of mentors. What happens when your work-life balance view is not in alignment with your senior mentor? And how do you balance that power imbalance in terms of balance, the work-life balance? And then the second question is, as you embark on your career, it's a lifelong process. Does your priorities evolve over time? So, like, kind of personally reflecting on like where I am right now, I think I stress more on my work-life balance, much more so than when I was kind of coming up in the ranks. So just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts about those two issues.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, I think if there's a power imbalance between mentor and mentee, uh, that's a point of friction. And I think uh, at least having a number of mentors helps.
Mhm.
Uh, at the GloCal, we do encourage, while we have primary mentors and we have, you know, other mentors, we also have trans mentors
Mhm.
who may not be the domain expert. And the trans mentors are sometimes a go-to person to say, I have this problem, and the problem needn't be a research problem at all. It could be, I'm having this childcare problem.
Mhm.
I just don't know how to deal with this. Someone who can shoulder, who can journey with you through that and give you some tips, because that's the frustration we have sometimes if you have a single mentor and when you have, you know, a power inequity there
Mhm.
where you're supposed to do as you're told sometimes and just you finish these deadlines as it just becomes too difficult. And then it's so more recently with some of the universities we work with for our doctoral students, we have an entire doctoral advisory committee now.
Mhm.
And we, besides the guide, or we call them guides here, the primary mentor, we have co-mentors, uh, and we do have trans mentors as well. And there is, uh, a way in which doctoral students can vent out if they're stuck in this situation, or there's a mechanism to also, you know, confidentially,
Mhm.
if they're in a difficult situation,
Right.
uh, address it to a committee that can take a grievance redressal, for example. So that's one way of looking at it.
Mhm.
On your second question about as someone progresses in their career, um, their priorities change, their goals change, and I think it's good to reflect at each time point. Because
Mhm.
sometimes I do recall at the time when even when I was growing up in the ranks, they were it was like a long tunnel with no light at the end of it. At
Yeah.
some points you would, I do recall 18-hour days, and the lines were all blurred. But
Mhm.
yes, uh, we we would encourage young, you know, early career researchers and faculty to kind of stop and think, where are we going? Where am I heading? My goals align with what am I doing? Uh,
Mhm.
and then ensuring that uh, the boundaries are set with work and life, with personal and professional. And I'm sure, you know, that would help. But I'm open to suggestions and see
Yeah.
if some of the fellows have different ideas or
Yeah.
thoughts.
Well, thank you. Okay, fellows, any thoughts? Okay, so we have a question in the chat. Okay,
Yeah, I'll just read it out. It says, could you
sure.
talk about your definition of success, both personally and professionally, and how that plays a role for prioritizing activities? Yeah, it's a difficult question. So, if while when someone's trying to achieve this balance, you know, uh, how would you define success both personally and professionally? For someone who's a early career researcher, getting a grant award would be a success, for example. but or publishing a paper in a reputed journal would be its success. And it all depends on the institutional metrics as well, where you work. But again, this is where reflection matters, because some of these metrics are more academic. Are you happy with what you've achieved? For example, if you're solving a problem that's affecting, if your research involves working with a community, and if you're able to, in a small way, nudge the gap in knowledge or translate some of your work into the community, that would be a success. Again, it could be, you might not have published this in a fancy journal. You might have given a conference presentation, but again, it all depends on one's perspective of what they consider is, professional success. And, personal, again, it depends, ensuring, having relationships. You heard the survey. Many people are unable to have proper relationships. There are breakups. There are a lot of friction because they're unable to devote the time required to nurture relationships. And this is a more difficult task to measure in terms of success. But yes, maintaining relationships, the general feeling of happiness is perhaps a more generic way of saying, yes, that's success. If you're happy, things are going well. And that's difficult to measure, but yes, there are happiness indexes and indices, which I'm sure we can explore. But I hope I've answered your question, at least to a small extent.
Okay. Any other questions? So we have just a few more minutes. All right. Well, Tony, thank you so much again. And I know that you had some suggested reading materials for the fellows as well as the link to the blog. So I encourage all the fellows to kind of see those resources. So thanks again. And Julie, any announcements for the upcoming session and announcements for the fellows?
I don't think so. Kimberly? Can't hear you.
Sorry, got to take myself off mute. I was going to say, no, I don't think so. I think we'll just be seeing everybody again in 2 weeks for our next Works in Progress.
Okay, great. And then we have a moderator for Works in Progress.
Yes, Natasha is doing the next
Okay,
one.
awesome. All right, I want to make sure I don't drop the ball.
Yeah, finally something you're not doing.
All right. Well, thank you all. And thanks again, Tony. And good to see you.
Thanks, Tony.
Appreciate
Thank you all. Thank you, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Jay. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.